Hey guys, so I'm going to discuss with you the basics of for loops and see if I can explain this in the simplest of ways, okay? So let me just write a quick program to execute a for loop, and then I'm going to explain it to you guys, okay? So just a really simple program for you guys, and then I'll explain it and tell you kind of what's going on here. So we're going to build that and execute it. Okay, so value of a, you can see, is 0, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So let me go ahead and explain what's going on here. So first, I want to say I set a to the initial value of 5 for a specific reason, okay? For loops have an initialization value. So that is what this is right here. This is my initialization value. So even though I initialized a to 5, when I set a for loop and I tell it I want to initialize a to something, it's going to ignore what a was initialized to and initialize a to whatever I set it to. So this right here is my initialization value, okay? That's the first thing we just want to discuss when we're talking about for loops is for loops have an initialization value. All right. The second thing that for loops run through is a condition. So for loops have a condition. Okay, and this condition has to be met to execute the code block here inside the for loop. So first you have your initialization value, and then you have your condition separated by a semicolon, okay? A is less than 10. That is my condition. So basically what we're saying is we want to initialize a to 0. So right here, and from now on, a is equal to 0 until it gets changed, okay? And I'll explain that in just a sec. So a is initialized to 0. So the program is going to say, okay, is a less than 10? And a is less than 10 because a is 0. So it's going to execute this code right here. Okay, so that's why it printed out when I ran this program. That's why the first thing it printed out was the value of a at 0 because 0 is less than 10. So what happens after it prints the value of a? Well, after it executes that code, it's going to check for some incrementation. So what do I want to increment my value of a? So I said I want to increment a by 1, and that's what this a++ here is. I could have done it as a equals a plus 1, okay, and this would give me the same thing if I execute it. That's exactly what is happening here, is it's incrementing a by 1, all right, and the simple way to do this is just to do a++, and that'll increment a by 1. So let's see what happens. As we reach this for loop, a is 5. Then it comes to this initialization command, and it initializes a to 0. So a is now 0. Then it checks for a condition. Is a less than 10 the condition I set? Yes, 0 is less than 10. So it's going to execute whatever code is inside this block. And what is inside this block is print the value of a that I have written out here. So it's going to do that. Then it comes to the bottom of this, and it increments a by 1 because that's what I set a to be incremented as. So after it does that, it's going to come back up to this condition. A is now 1. Is 1 less than 10? So it's checking if it meets that condition. It is. So then it runs through this program again. And it does that until it reaches 9. And 9 is less than 10. But then once it gets to 10, A is no longer less than 10. So it's not going to meet that condition. And I really quickly want to print out something here real quick for you guys. So the value of a after for loop. Okay, and we're going to see what this prints out. So you can see, you would think, okay, so it's going to be 9 and it's no longer 10, so our value for a is going to be 10, or our value for a is going to be 9. But it's not true. So because in the way the for loop works is the very last thing it does is it increments a is going to end up being 10 once it gets outside of this for loop, okay? So that's just like something important to note about for loops, all right? So we've ran through this, we've initialized it to 0, it increments a by 1 after it executes the code if it meets this condition. And then once this condition is false, so once it increments a to 10 and 10 is no longer less than 10, it's going to exit this for loop. So it's done with this for loop, and that's why we get this print statement right here. So if I set this equal to 5, so a is less than 5, it's only going to print the values up to 4, and then a is going to be 5 once it exits that for loop. So that's the basics of for loops and how they work. And I'm going to show you really quick kind of a on-screen idea of what's going on when I execute this code. Okay, so here's our program, and over to the right is some things that are going to graphically animate what goes on inside this for loop. So let's go ahead and run the program. So we get into our main function, we set a to 5, so you can see a is equal to 5. We get inside our for loop, initialize the value of a to 0, and then it's going to check if a is less than 10. It is. And so then it's going to execute the print statement I have inside the for loop. So it just printed out a 0. And now it just incremented the value to 1. So it's going to do this again in the for loop, and you can see it run up and check the condition again, and the condition is met because 1 is less than 10. So then it prints out the value of a is 1, and then it goes to increment a again as well. So I'm just going to speed it up here so you guys can kind of see this in action for the rest of the values inside the for loop. So you can see it working through this for loop kind of visually as it goes around and around, checking the condition and then incrementing the value. And what we have here now is a is 10, and it's checking the condition, and it's going to see that a is not less than 10. So we get outside of the for loop now because the condition was not met. So now we get to print what is outside of the for loop statement and finish our code. And so that's pretty much the basics of for loops, guys. So I hope this little graphic animation helps you guys understand what is going on when we're discussing for loops, and hopefully in the future you'll be able to code for loops and keep this in mind, and hopefully it makes it easier for you to understand. Thank you, guys.